need more than 4.5 or 5 hours sleep a night.
Well, you say 8, and adults, the older you get, you need more. You need 8 to 9. Ooh.
The older you get, you need what?
More sleep. More sleep.
Oh,
Like 8 to 9 hours.
oh gosh, I don't do any of that.
We do. We go to bed early. Well, we don't always sleep, but we go to bed.
Well, and then Shelley needs fellowship, so
Yes.
we have to go out to dinner every single night.
Oh.
Okie doke.
And then she sleeps.
I gave you several different things today.
Ready to go to bed.
We're doing, the unit is technically called the Despairing Denier, and it looks, the primary text is Mark 14:66 to 72. I took the one piece that should be 4 pages to it, was actually from our Mark study. I thought it's already there, so we'll only start at verse 66 on that. But to make it easy for you, I took from this book, since I own I can print the text out legally. I thought I'd just do it from this book, have it all there for you. There are all 4 Gospels, the details of Peter's first denial and second and third denial. If you're looking for something, there is something missing between John's Gospel, between verses 19 to 24. I took that out since that's not referring to Peter's second denial. That way I could get it on a nice little page, or I blew it up really big so you could see it easier. Put that one in color. So the left-hand column is Matthew, the second column is Mark, third is Luke, and the final is John. I thought the color helps, and the large print helps a little bit easier to read for all of that. So that's all the introductory stuff that tells you what all those pages are for. So let's begin with the prayer so we can get to Despairing Denier. We pray. Gracious Lord, open our hearts and lives to you as we continue our study of Simon Peter's relationship with Jesus himself and what we can learn through that about our relationship with him as well. So bless us in this time. Open our hearts and lives to you. We pray in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. So remember our setting. It's a long day. Remember we talked about Peter's long day. Things in the back of his mind as he would have come here. We've gone through, this day is the day that he went and he had to, with John, interesting to me, he never put this together. Simon, Peter, and John are the ones who set up the Last Supper. And it's interesting that they're the ones who will go to the high priest location, both of them. And those are the two who will go first to the tomb of the the apostles. Interesting, all of that, how that fits together. So he set that up, experienced the Last Supper. Remember, we believe that Judas Iscariot had his spot, the best friend spot, the one to the left. That's what we believe, most people believe, where the seating was. What else happened? So they go out to the Garden of Gethsemane. He says, you with James and John, still those two guys, Simon, Peter, and John, still close to Jesus. And so you come a little bit farther, stay awake, watch him pray, fall asleep instead. Crowd comes to gather Jesus, and Simon Peter is the only one who responds, interestingly. We still believe it's the sword went this way instead of this way, trying to kill Malchus, which interestingly John knows his name, nobody else lists his name. And then Jesus, remember we talked about it, kind of like gives up, if you will. He just surrendered and let them take him. And so it's been a very bad, horrible, no good day that continues on, but there are some interesting things that happen here to Simon Peter and I guess to John as well. So let's jump into the text. We'll go to, you'll need Mark out. Well, I guess probably the easiest one is just the little four gospel part. We'll look at Mark and pull out a few things from the textual one, but mostly from that. Verse 66. While Peter was in the courtyard below, I forgot. I have that printed. Where did it go here? Before we got to that, I should have put these verses on. I wrote them down instead. This is John 18, verses 15 to 16. The two verses before the whole thing with Peter's denial. So this is what it says. Simon Peter was following Jesus, as was another disciple. We believe that another disciple is John. That disciple was an acquaintance of the high priest, so he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard, but Peter remained standing outside by the door. So the other disciple, the one known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the girl who was the doorkeeper and brought Peter in. So think about this. I kind of thought John came and went, but the emphasis is that John was there along with Simon Peter. They're both there through this whole thing. How did he know? How did the other disciple, whom we believe is John, know? Well, there is an ancient tradition, fairly well ascribed, so I don't know what you do with that, that says that John had delivered fish there to the high priest when he was working with his father Zebedee. And they have allegedly found a fish market that's been excavated at Jerusalem that somehow has been assigned to belonging to Zebedee. Now that's a lot of stuff there, but it's an ancient tradition where the early church fathers, maybe something there. If it's all true, first of all, it tells you it was a pretty big fishing operation if they can take fish all the way from Galilee down to Jerusalem. But, they could do that with fish, do it in certain ways. So it's interesting. But the important thing to know is that the text says that there was a disciple. It's thought to be John. Oftentimes he doesn't list himself. I found it funny that he didn't say the one whom Jesus loved, because that's how he usually identifies himself. But maybe there's a reason for this. But he gets there, goes into the high priest's courtyard. And so what's interesting about that is that in verse, let's see, where do I want? Where did it go? Probably either verse 69 of Matthew 26, or you could even look at Luke 22, verse 56. This man was with him too. So, could refer to. Also, the word is actually literally is also, or in our translation from verse 66, it says, you also were with Jesus, the man of Nazareth. So either this girl was there at the Garden of Gethsemane, or they know who Peter is. Who John is as a disciple. And so there's a second person there who is a believer. So I think that's an interesting part that you could possibly, it helps this little situation a little bit more, I think. It's a long way to get to that point. I should have thought that through a little better. Anyway, while Peter was in the courtyard below, one of the high priest's maidservants came. When she saw Peter warming himself, she looked at him and said, you also were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth. Now it's interesting in the Greek, the way that it's written, the you also is listed first, and that's an unusual place for it to be first in the sentence. And if it's there for emphasis. And so we're supposed to take note of that, there's another one. So there is a second person there called Simon Peter, who is there with the man from Nazareth. Interesting how that's there. So what does Peter do? What does Simon Peter do? Verse 68. All four agree with this. He denied it. It's a simple word. It's the word that's used or neomai, to repudiate knowing, to disown, I do not know. He denied, I don't know or understand what you're talking about. What did Simon Peter say to Jesus before this? Do you remember what he had said?
I'll never deny you. I'll never.
He was pretty emphatic about it, wasn't he? Think about that. Why was he so emphatic about never doing it? Let's see, Mark 14, verse 29. Even if everyone else deserts you, I never will. That sounds pretty sure. John 13, 37. I am ready to die for you. Matthew 26, 33. Well, this is a repeat of Mark 14. Even if everyone else deserts you, I never will. And Matthew 26, 35. Not even if I have to die with you, I will never deny you. Bless you. Never is a long time. So what does he deny? Why promise and now deny? What would you do if you were Simon Peter? If your friend John, also a follower of Jesus, had gotten you into the inner courtyard. This is, by the way, the courtyard in verse 66 in Mark. It's the large courtyard. So there's an entry courtyard, and this is the main one, if you will, kind of toward the back. It's interesting when in verse 68, the text says, then he went out to the entryway, which was the smaller courtyard, which is right by the entrance. So he's kind of getting ready to make his run for it, if you will, to run out. So he's way back there. He's where all the action with all the folks who are sitting out listening. Mr. 10.
So, but Jesus is in the courtyard. Could he have heard?
Jesus is inside. So it's interesting if you look at the, let's see, where did it go? Oh, here we go. If you look at Luke's gospel, verse 61, this is after the third denial. So we're down at the bottom of the third column. After he had said, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Immediately, why he, that's Simon Peter, was still speaking, the rooster crowed. So this is the second time, right? That's what Jesus had said. This is unique to Luke. Then the Lord turned and looked at Peter. This is unique to Luke. You won't see it in Matthew, Mark, or John. Interesting. Why don't we see it in Mark? You know, this is Peter's gospel. Why wouldn't he include that? So at that point, if they're moving Jesus, I don't know exactly how it looks, if you will, but Jesus at that point is able to see Peter and looks at him. We'll talk about the look in a few minutes, not right now, but it's at some point, yes, he is able to see. But for the most time, he's out with the group of people outside warming themselves by the fire. So why the change in Simon Peter's actions from his words? Have you ever done that, by the way? Said one thing and do something else when faced with a difficult situation?
No.
Ooh, yeah.
Apparently none of you. You're all perfect people. What can I say? I'm not
I
perfect.
haven't. I mean, it's hard to think of something right off the spot.
It's hard to admit
It's
it.
hard to.
Sometimes we make promises and don't keep them.
Right.
We say we're going to do something and we can't follow through. There's fear involved. Think of the other thing that goes on here. Simon Peter had taken a sword. It's a small, compact, hidden type. Took a swat at one of the people, had drawn blood. Jesus fixed up the ear, however exactly that happens. I mean, it's amazing to think about. And nothing else is said about that. He could have been, hey, you tried to do something. We're taking you in too, right? But they didn't do that. So I don't know if it's because it was dark, they couldn't see everything, but that kind of is fascinating. Maybe Jesus in his power said, we're not going to let them take Peter, but Peter probably had that in his mind too. He's thinking, they know I'm one of his followers. The fear is, are they going to take me too? Because remember, after Jesus dies, we're all going to be hiding in a locked upper room for fear that they might come and take us as well to kill us. So maybe that's all started in his mind. But think of everything else that's happened to him that day. I mean, it's been a terrible, very terrible, horrible, no good day for Simon Peter. I mean, lots of stuff. Mr. Tim.
I guess I was thinking it from Jesus' point of view. I mean, as you said, it's been a pretty rough day, and then his best friend just denies him. I mean,
It's a hard thing.
yeah.
It's a hard thing, and I think it will affect Peter for the rest of his life.
Right,
It's not something he goes, oh well, c'est la vie, you know, what will be, will be. But it's going to affect him the rest of his life.
Well, he wept. He went out and wept. So
I'm sorry?
Peter went out and wept. So he
Oh, you're going too fast for us. We're not there yet. This is a before weeping Peter. So notice, okay. Verse 68, I'm back to Mark's gospel. But he, that's Peter, denied, I don't understand what you're talking about. So then he went from the entryway, went out to the entryway, and a rooster crowed. On the version I put there, actually it's on the other one too, the best texts the preferred texts do not have and a rooster crowed there. If you have a King James, it will be there because it was in Textus Receptus, but the text that they use now, it does not occur there. And it believes, they have all these fancy terms for why copyists did this and that, and I forget the one is, but if you look at verse 72 of Mark's Gospel, it includes a second time. And so if there's a second time, there has to be a first time. And so that's why they said, well, he crowed a first time. Interesting. Does anybody else have that? I'm trying to remember. It's only there. In none of the other versions does it talk about a first rooster crow, does it? Help me look. I don't see it. Only there in verse 68 of Mark. Nope.
Verse
Don't see it.
72.
Interesting. So rooster crows. Jesus says, before the rooster crows twice, you'll deny me 3 times. So we're at 1. Verse 69. Then the maidservant, actually it's a female slave. I don't know why we translated servant. She is a slave. Saw him again. It's interesting. So she goes from the inner courtyard to the outer courtyard. She begins talking to the folks around. This man is one of them. But remember, we have another one of them around there, John, who's there as well. Well, what does Simon Peter do? Verse 70. Again, he denied it. Same word used before. After a little while, those standing there said to Peter again, you certainly are one of them, since you're also a Galilean. If you look at, which one? Come on. Oh, if you look at John's Gospel, verse 26, this is interesting. John provides a little more detail that none of the others provided. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off. Isn't that interesting? So he's a relative. John knows who he is. Didn't I see you with him in the garden? Oh, no, not me. No, I wasn't there. You're thinking of somebody else. Think of that. This guy would have heard, probably by that time, I'm guessing, that the ear had been cut. And so there's even more fear if you look here. But notice that's the only one, only of the 4 that says that. You certainly were one of them, since you're a Galilean. Verse 71, this is Mark again. Then he started to curse and swear. I don't know this man you're talking about. Have you ever noticed he doesn't use Jesus' name there? This man. This is his best friend. This is his chance to say, yes, I know him. He's my best friend and all of this. I don't know this man you're talking about. Curse and swear in verse 71, anathematizo, to put under a curse, to invoke a curse upon yourself in case I'm lying. So he invokes a curse on himself. He swears to promise solemnly, usually invoking a divine witness, by God's name, if you will. I am telling the truth. And it often includes penalties for failure. But it just says he had started to curse and swear, I don't know this man. I don't know Jesus, the one you're talking about. And then in verse 72 of Mark, there's our favorite work of Mark. Immediately, Euthus, immediately, as soon as he gets it out, the rooster crows the second time. And then that's when John's gospel points out that Jesus looked at him. I want to look at the look and, oh, that was good. Look at the look in just a minute, but we'll get there in just a minute. But look at that. And Peter remembered when Jesus had spoken the word to him. Word is rhema there. There's a publishing company, isn't there? A Bible publishing company, I think, called Rhema or something like that. So that's where they get their word. The word. This, he had told him this saying. It could be word or saying. Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. To break down what he had done weighed heavily upon him. It's interesting. The word for breakdown is etabalo, to put on, to lay a hand on, literally putting something heavy on something. So it's weighing down on him heavily, and he cries. To wail, to lament. Pretty big stuff. He went out. When Judas failed, what did he do? He went out and he hung himself. Does Peter go out and hang himself? Sorry for that. He does not go out and hang himself. So there's something still there. He doesn't give up entirely at this point. If you turn to the Luke passage, verse 60, but Peter said, man, I don't know what you're talking about. Immediately while he was still speaking, a rooster crowed. Here's where we look at verse 61 and 62. Then the Lord turned and looked at Peter. What type of a look do you think it was?
Love. Yeah.
I told you so.
Anyone think? I'm sorry? Frederick, what was that? Oh, come on. I'll have to play back the recording. Maybe I can hear it that way.
No, actually, he said, I told you so. And actually, that's not bad because it's like, it would be the same as saying, I'm confirming that I really did know what I was talking about.
But you didn't say it in a
No, exactly.
But think about Peter's day. Everything he thought that was true about Jesus he does not see it coming out that way. So he could say, honestly, I don't know the man. He's not who I thought. He's not doing what I thought he would do. That's an interesting way to look at it. It's possible to put that input there. Think about that, right? Jesus is in the garden. Jesus submits to them. Along with the rest of the disciples, I would think that Simon Peter thought that Jesus was going to be crowned in. He doesn't think about suffering and death. He thinks of the exact opposite. That's not what a Messiah would do. So I don't know him. Even though we've got this 3-year history, I thought I knew what was going to happen, but it's different than I thought was going to happen. Maybe that's what I don't know.
Doesn't sound like a denial, though.
That's true.
Sounds like I don't understand.
Yes, but Jesus told them.
I'm sorry?
Jesus told them he had to go and die. So
And they keep misunderstanding that all those 3 times because they talk about something entirely different. Usually it's called they're confused. They don't understand. Surely that can't happen. This shall never happen to you, he says one time, right?
yeah.
Then get behind me, Satan. So I think Simon Peter is going to be confused. I think confusion, at least. Yes, ma'am.
This passage has always been too personal, in that I see in this all of the people throughout time who have denied Jesus so that they could live long enough to serve him. Maybe it's a lack of trust rather than a lack of faith. You know what I mean? In other words, I've always wondered whether if I was about to die, if I didn't say, no, I don't know what you're talking about, so that later on I could go and feed his sheep.
Okay, one of the first controversies in the early Christian church, well, there were several, I guess, but one of the first was, what do you do with people who deny knowing Jesus when threatened, and their thought is basically what you're saying, I'm going to live so I can tell people. And so there was a big controversy of whether they could be part of church having denied Jesus.
Okay.
You know, I still remember we did King's X. I guess you didn't do King's X
Yeah.
around here.
We didn't call it that. We just
Right.
said cross my fingers.
Okay, but when you cross your fingers, it's going back. The first people that did this, well, probably other people did it too, but the way it was used by Christians is as a symbol of Christianity. This is kind of a gang sign, a Christian gang sign. If you can see that, I'm going to kind of say, and so it's kind of an inside symbol, if you will. And so I know that people kind of, one of the things, the original, you put this behind, it's kind of like Jesus can't see what you're doing now, so you can get by with it type thing, which of course doesn't work that way, but that's a kid's understanding, you know, out of sight, out of mind, out of sight, out of mind type thing, you can't get by.
You know, the term fingers crossed has crept back into people's vocabulary. You know how these things become popular. People say, fingers crossed, it won't rain today and ruin the crops. I've heard that.
Yep.
No.
People are starting to say that.
So it doesn't work very well though, does it?
It's totally different from all of this.
But I think, you know, if you look again at verse 61, the look is interesting. It's a look of, I don't think it's a look of condemnation. I think it, like the rest of you are saying, is the look of love and forgiveness, knowing the difficulty that he's going through. I mean, because Jesus is going through this for Peter's sake. Well, for everyone's sake, but for Peter's sake. For Peter's failures to forgive those, to restore those, if you will. Mr. Tim.
Well, think of, and Peter, as his best friend, pulls out his sword or knife and said whether it's this way or that way, but
He's making the sign of the cross.
right. And then denies him. I mean, he does what a best friend would do. You're taking my best friend and I'm going to protect him. And then when the time came to either honor him or not, I deny him. So Peter's going through a lot of confusion, and I do believe that Jesus looked upon him not with anger, but with love.
I'm going to read you something. This is from Card's Book of Fragile Stone. It's a page length, sorry, so I hope you can stay awake through the whole thing. Along with the pressure of being identified as the one who drew his sword in the garden, I believe there is another tone mixed with Peter's denial. Beneath that first superficial layer of fear is a deeper emotion. Kierkegaard calls it the sickness unto death, despair. Consider once again the course of the evening. At first, Peter is called on to play the servant, a role he seems perfectly willing to take on himself. But in the course of the meal, he finds his usual place beside Jesus, now occupied by Judas. Again, these are small speculative pieces, but they have a cumulative force. Next, when Jesus makes the absurd offer of washing his feet, Peter only says what the others should have said. This is not appropriate. He is only seeking to preserve his master's dignity, and for this he receives a stern rebuke. Then on the way to the garden, Jesus prophesies that Peter will deny him. You can begin to sense that his grip on the fragile and fragmented reality he has constructed around Jesus is beginning to slip. In the garden, he is invited, along with James and John, to keep watch with Jesus. All three of them will fail in their vigil, but only Peter is rebuked. Finally, as the soldiers move to arrest Jesus, Peter alone responds with a full measure of courage. He draws the sword that Jesus had earlier told them to purchase, even at the cost of their coats. If any action could have proven once and for all his fidelity to Jesus, it was this. Yet once again, Peter is rebuked. Finally, he is left standing, holding his bloody sword, watching Jesus allow himself to be bound and led away. Once we have this course of events clearly in mind, we can hear the deeper tone of Peter's denials. I do not know the man. Something to think about in that as well. I think the first level is, of course, I don't know him, so I'm going to save my life, but maybe there's that tone as well, that I don't know him for that. What would that night have been like for Peter then? After he goes out, he's weeping. What's the next time we hear of Peter?
Wow.
Do we have him at the cross?
No.
He's not mentioned there, right? John is mentioned by name, but I do not believe Peter is mentioned. I'm sorry?
He's fishing.
Fishing? Yeah, I don't know. I think maybe he's still weeping. I don't know. The first time I remember Peter is mentioned is
Sunday
when the
morning.
ladies come
Sunday
to say,
Yeah.
and then who runs out to the tomb?
Peter.
It's Peter and John. They run out. We'll hear then that, there's some uncertainty of whether Jesus is alive. Simon is still confused at that point. But someplace, and it's interesting, that there as Jesus appears to Simon Peter, we're told that he appears, but we're not told what happened then. I find that interesting too, why Mark did not include that as well. I don't know. It's a difficult day for Simon Peter. Well, first of all, it's a difficult day for Jesus, obviously. We usually look at it in that light, but I think if you look at it from Simon's viewpoint, it's a difficult day for him where he 3 times has an opportunity to stand his ground, and 3 times he fails. Do any of you think that you could have, if Jesus is your best friend, if you had been with him for 3 years, could you have said, yes, I was? Or would you have possibly done the same thing? Or am I asking too hard of a question?
I think it's hard to say until it
That's
actually
right.
happens,
That's
you
right.
know, because everybody wants to say, I would go with him, and then, but you don't know what you would do.
Brutal times, so
Yeah.
brutality.
Fear of what might happen to himself, and I think
But you're mentioning from the Fragile Stone, is that what it's called? The book.
Mm-hmm.
I love that thought because when a child is rebuked several times when he doesn't think he should have been, what does he do? He turns away from the parent at that point.
Okay, interesting. So this is several rebukes. I guess it is several rebukes
Yeah,
in a row.
I thought about that.
It's always interesting to look at the difference between Judas Iscariot and Simon Peter, both of whom had very bad days. I mean, Judas Iscariot thought he was doing the right thing, obviously. He figured out it was wrong, and then he did not ask for forgiveness. Peter will be forgiven later on. It's interesting that it will be a threefold forgiveness. We'll get into that on another session that's upcoming. But isn't it interesting that he will be forgiven? And I again think that Simon Peter is Jesus' best friend because he's someone we can all identify with. A guy who has I want to stand with Jesus, and he has great faults. Just like you and I.
Human.
Well, I won't talk about it. Just like I have great faults and say I want to do certain things and I mess up and I don't follow through the way that I should. I'm sure none of you have ever done any of that type of stuff, but I won't say that about you.
But you started out on the right track. You tried to give the money back.
He did get the money back.
Yeah, well.
But it was too late.
Right.
Everything was already in motion by that time. There's another thought. Let's see. Oh, this is how, I wrote this out to get this from Card's book as well. Right at the end of this chapter, he says, though we can know for certain that he, that's Simon Peter, was completely forgiven, one wonders if he ever completely forgave himself. That's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
And then he finishes this way. There's one more interesting omission. At the conclusion of his version of the story, John simply says the cock crowed. He omits the heartbreak of Peter, since he alone was there to witness this total breaking of his companion. It is not hard to understand why he could not find the words to tell us about it. The other way I thought of is, well, we have three other versions telling us about his breaking down. But it is interesting that John, if that is who John was, the other one known to the high priest's household, if it actually is John, that he could have been there and seen all of this as well. But again, he's not mentioned as opposed just before this text, having brought him there, and he's not the primary person. That's what I had. Do we have time? Oh my, we even have time. Okay. All right. Tim.
What is the consensus of how Jesus looked at Peter?
The consensus?
I believe he looked at him with love.
I think the consensus is not one of condemnation, but is of love and forgiveness.
Yes.
I've never really heard anyone else try to make another point. I mean, the word that's used there, I didn't use that. The word that's used there, where did that go? The pages are out of order now. Here's in the gaze. Emblepo, which is the same word that Jesus uses when he tells the disciples to consider the lilies of the field. It means to see with your mind, to understand. It is sometimes translated, look straight at. But I think even that doesn't capture the thing. To me, it's when Jesus looks at someone and he knows who the person is. It's kind of like looking directly to your soul. That's the look, I think, that Jesus does. And so he knows Peter's fears, his confusion, his uncertainty that time. And he doesn't condemn him for that, I don't believe, but instead forgives him for that, for a very human thing that he did. Mm-hmm. Even Jesus at the Garden of Gethsemane asked if it's possible to take this cup from me. You know, the human part of Jesus, I think, is really coming out. I know it's going to come. I know it's not going to be easy. If you've ever seen Mel Gibson's version of this, that's pretty bloody of what it's done, and that probably isn't even as bloody as it should be. According to early documents, extra-biblical stuff, people who were whipped often died in that whipping even before crucifixion. The things they used would basically tear skin, and so your back would be open. Can you imagine carrying whether it's the crossbeam or the whole cross on your back like that. And it's all designed to make you very weak and suffer as much as you can. So it'd be a terrible thing, terrible day coming for Jesus. It's been a long day as well. Anything else? We'll close early. We hardly ever do that.
Thank you for your teaching.
So we'll pick up again next week and continue our walk through Simon Peter and Jesus' life together. It's not going to get any easier for Simon Peter. I guess that's why we call it faith, isn't it?
Yeah.
It takes a lot of trust in. Let's close with a short prayer. Gracious Lord, we thank you that you looked at Simon. We believe it's a look knowing who he was and knowing what he had gone through to get to that point in his life. We believe it was a look of love and forgiveness. Lord, look at us with love and forgiveness when we fail you. Pick us up and help us walk with you and for you in the lives that you give us. We ask it in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. I should have brought that poem, right? You know the poem that fits right there? It's the poem about the fellow walking on the seashore. You know, and there are two sets of footprints, and then where were you in the tough times? And that's when I was carrying you, type thing. I think maybe that fits here as well. So it brought that thing. That was done anonymously, wasn't it? Some lady actually finally said she's the one that did that. Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your kind attention.